Hello everyone, this is Tom Thorne from Avde El Elyon, Servants of the Most High God Ministries, and today is January 17, 2021. It's amazing, isn't it? 2021. Hard to believe. Yavo Yeshua, Yavo Yeshua. Come Yeshua, come Yeshua. Yavo Yeshua. As a part of our weekly Sabbath services at Avde El Elyon, what we do is part of our services, our weekly Sabbath services, include Bible reading and discussion. We have a 3-year cycle. In year 1, we follow the standard Torah reading and go through the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Tanakh. In year 2, we read and discuss and study the Old Testament writings and prophets. Last year we got through the book of 1 Samuel. And in year 3, we primarily read and discuss the 4 Gospels with a focus on the words of Yeshua. Now this happens to be year 3 for us right now. So as we read into the life and teachings of Yeshua and beyond in the Brit Chadashah in the New Testament, we run into the name Herod again and again and again. We see Herod mentioned at the time of the birth of Yeshua. We see Herod mentioned during the life of John the Baptist. We see Herod mentioned during the lives of Peter and Paul. Is this the same person? It would seem impossible with the time frames involved. Was there more than one Herod? Were there 2 or 3, or how many Herods? Did they go by the same name? In our class today, we're going to do a brief review of the Herods of the Bible, what is known as the Herodian Dynasty. So let's get ready to enjoy ourselves and hopefully learn a little along the way too. Now, before we get started, I want us to have some fun with this topic. I have a few questions to ask about the Herods. Now, these are not trick questions. Don't be concerned. These are not trick questions. These are just for our own benefit, to see how much we know about the Herods before we get started. When I did this class for our fellowship, I handed out my notes first and told everybody this is open book, open Bible, open notes, open everything. And these are just a few questions for us to see how well we know the Herods of the Bible. Now, as I told my class, our fellowship, if you get 1 or 2 right on these, you get an A. Okay, so I'm going to ask these questions, pause a few seconds, maybe give some hints, pause, and then give the answer. So while I'm asking these questions, you can be thinking of the answer yourself. If you'd like to use these questions later on for yourself, for your own purposes, just send me an email. I'll be glad to send the questions to you. My email address will be shown at the end of the presentation. Okay, so what I call Herod Trivia. Herod Trivia. Question number 1. Who was the founder of the Herodian Dynasty? Who is the founder of the Herodian Dynasty? And the hint for this question is, he was not a king. He was not a king. The answer to the person that's given the credit for being the founder of the Herodian Dynasty was Antipater the Idumean. He was the father of the first Herod king, Antipater the Idumean, given the credit for being the founder of the Herodian Dynasty. Okay, question number 2. Who was the first king of the Herodian Dynasty? Who was the first king of the Herodian Dynasty? Now that would have been a Herod, yes. Which one? That would have been Herod the Great, who ruled from 37 BC to 4 BC. Herod the Great. Question number 3. Who built Masada? Who's given the credit for building Masada? The hint is, it's the same as number 2. Herod the Great. Masada was originally Herod's winter palace, as well as the place where the last Jews stood in approximately 70 AD or so. So Herod the Great is given the credit for building Masada. Question number 4. Who renovated the temple and made it much greater and more exquisite than it ever was before? Who renovated the temple? The answer to that is, once again, Herod the Great. Herod the Great. Question number 5. How many sons did Herod the Great have? How many sons did Herod the Great have? I'll give you a hint. It's less than 5. So if you don't have any idea, you have a 20% chance at least if you guess. That would have been, the answer to that is 4. Herod the Great had 4 sons. Herod Archelaus, Herod Philip, Herod Antipas, and Aristobulus IV. Question number 6. How many of Herod the Great's sons became kings? Now think of it. Did they all become kings? Did one of them become kings? 2 of them? How many of his sons became kings? Once again, a guess will give you a 25% chance. The answer is 3. Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Herod Philip all became kings. Okay, question number 7. How were Herod the Great's territories divided upon his death? How were Herod the Great's territories divided upon his death? Well, they were actually divided into quarters, into 4 parts. Although one of his sons got 2 of these parts. So if you said quarters, your answer is correct. If you said 1/2 and 2 quarters, your answer is correct. Okay. So question number 8. Who got Judea? Who got Judea? And the answer to that, well, we have 1 of 3. We have Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, or Herod Philip. One of those 3. The answer is Herod Archelaus. Herod Archelaus. He got Judea, and actually he was the one that got the half territory. Okay, so question number 9. What is a tetrarch? That's a word we read in the Bible, tetrarch. What is a tetrarch? A tetrarch is a ruler of a portion. Now, if you think Herod's land was divided into portions, a tetrarch would have been a ruler of one of these portions, which is a quarter. So a tetrarch, by definition, is the ruler of a quarter. Ruler of a quarter. Okay, number 10. How many kings were in the Herodian Dynasty in total? How many kings were in the Herodian Dynasty in total? We've already talked about 4. Herod the Great, Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, and Herod Philip. So there were at least 4 we know of were a part of the dynasty. Does anybody know how many more kings there were in the Herodian dynasty? Okay. My producer says, yes, I know. The answer is there were a total of 6. So there were 2 more kings after Herod's sons. And question number 11. So who was the 5th king in the Herodian dynasty? After Herod the Great, after Herod Archelaus, after Herod Philip, and after Herod Antipas, the next king was Herod Agrippa I. Herod Agrippa I. Okay, we all doing okay now? We only got a couple more questions. Question number 12. Who was the Herod that had John the Baptist killed? And the answer to that was Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas. Number 13. Who put Peter in prison? Who put Peter in prison? That would be Herod Well, let's think about this for a second. Herod Archelaus ruled from 4 BC to 6 AD. Herod Philip ruled from 4 BC to 34 AD. Herod Antipas ruled from 4 BC to 39 AD. So if we think that Yeshua was crucified somewhere near 30, 31 or so AD, the chances are that Peter would have been put in prison a few years after that at least. So all of those Herods might have already been dead. So it would have probably had to have been one of the last 2 Herods that put Peter in prison. And we just said that the 5th king in the Herodian dynasty was Herod Agrippa I, and the 6th king was Herod Agrippa II. So it probably had to be one of those 2. So now you've narrowed your choices down to a 50% answer. That's a 50% chance if you guess on this one. So the answer to who put Peter in prison is Herod Agrippa I. Herod Agrippa I. And then number 14, question number 14. Who is Aristobulus IV? We haven't mentioned Aristobulus IV other than he was the 4th son of Herod the Great. Now, Aristobulus IV was the 4th son of Herod the Great. He was a prince, but he never became a king. He never became a king yet. His son, Agrippa, Herod Agrippa I, was the next Herodian king, and Agrippa I's son, Herod Agrippa II, was the 6th Herodian king. So although Aristobulus was not a king himself, his son and his grandson became kings. And question number 15. Who interviewed Paul in Caesarea as recorded late in the book of Acts? Okay, now if we consider late in the book of Acts, we're definitely speaking in the 40s or the 50s, probably late 30s, 40s, 50s AD. And the answer to that would have been Herod Agrippa II. Herod Agrippa II. Okay, so that's our quiz to see how well aware of the Herods we are before the presentation. Now this is going to just be a brief little discussion on the Herods. There were actually 6 different Herods mentioned in the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament, and they are all somehow related to each other as we've gone over. What I want to do is give brief sketches of all 6 of these to help you keep track of who is who. Help you keep track of them. Help you keep track of who is who. Now this is not going to be long either. The first one is Herod the Great, of course, the first Herod, who ruled from 37 BC to 4 BC. So Herod the Great was a powerful client king answerable to Rome. He's the one that tried to trick the wise men. He married a woman named Mariamne, who was the granddaughter of the Hasmonean king Aristobulus II, the Hasmonean Jewish king Aristobulus II. So we have this Herod the Great, who was not a Jew, marrying Mariamne, who was a Jew. Eventually, he had her and their 2 sons killed. Now, to talk a little bit about Mariamne. Mariamne was Herod the Great's Jewish wife, and she was actually Herod's 2nd wife. She was the granddaughter of the Hasmonean king Aristobulus II. Aristobulus ruled as part of the Hasmonean Jewish dynasty from about 66 to 63 BC. Now, for any of you who may not recall, the Hasmonean dynasty came into existence after the revolt of the Jewish people, initially led by Judas Maccabee. And from about 140 to 63 BC, the Jewish people once again regained their kingdom, and they had a kingdom, the Jewish kingdom, and it was known as the Hasmonean dynasty. So picture this. We have the following. We have Aristobulus II, who ruled from 66 to 63. His son was Alexander of Judea. And Alexander of Judea's daughter was Mariamne. Mariamne, and she's the woman that Herod the Great married at a very early age. Therefore, Mariamne claimed herself to be part of royalty. My grandfather was a king of the Jews, so I'm a part of royalty. I'm a princess. And Herod, by marrying Mariamne, a Jew, could claim himself a Jewish convert, and therefore hope to appease the Jewish Israelite people he was ruling over. That was his idea. Eventually, Mariamne was convicted of evil, and Herod had her executed in 29 BC. But this was 14 years after Herod came into rule over the part of Judea. Herod was also credited to be an outstanding, fantastic architect. He's credited for building for renovating the temple. He's credited for building the port of Caesarea, the Hippodrome in Caesarea, Caesarea Maritime, and Masada. I mean, these are outstanding edifices, fantastic. If you ever go to Israel, be sure to go to Caesarea Maritime, and you'll see the buildings that Herod was credited for starting to build, and the parts that remains of the Hippodrome. It's outstanding. Herod the Great is also the one that had the babies killed in Bethlehem. Once again, he ruled from about 37 to 4 BC. So this tells us something about the birth of Yeshua. It tells us something about the fact that the birth of Yeshua could not have been in the year 0, and besides the fact that there was no year 0, it could not have been in 1 BC. If Herod ruled till 4 BC, and he had the babies killed, Yeshua had to be born in 4 BC or prior to 4 BC. That's something that some people are not aware of. Okay, the second Herod we want to talk about is Herod Archelaus, who ruled from 4 BC to 6 AD. He was one of Herod the Great's sons. He was one of Herod the Great's 3 sons mentioned in the Bible. And he received 1/2 of his father's territory, the area surrounding Jerusalem, the area near and surrounding Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria. He actually received 1/2 of the territory. Joseph, Yeshua's stepfather, was unwilling to move Mary and infant Jesus to Bethlehem after fleeing to Egypt because Bethlehem was in this Herod's territory. He was replaced by a Roman procurator less than 10 years into his reign. So that's why Pontius Pilate is the man in charge at Yeshua's crucifixion rather than one of the Herods. One of the Herods had been removed from that rulership way back about 6 AD. That would have been Herod Archelaus. A procurator was an individual in ancient Rome who was in charge of financial affairs of a province or an imperial governor of a minor province. So the next son we want to talk about is Herod Antipas. Antipas ruled from about 4 BC to 39 AD. Jesus called him that fox in Luke 13 verse 32. He received 1/4 of his father's territory, the territory of Galilee and Perea. He divorced his first wife and married Herodias, the wife of his brother, who was a different Herod, the wife of Philip. I believe that was the wife of Philip. He's the one who had John the Baptist killed. Pontius Pilate sent Yeshua Jesus to see this Herod as a part of Jesus' trial, since this Herod was visiting Jerusalem at the time Yeshua was sentenced to death. So when we read about the Herod at the time of Yeshua's death, this would have been Herod Antipas. Okay, and the next Herod we want to talk about is Herod Philip the Tetrarch, who ruled from 4 BC to 34 AD. He got the remaining quarter of his father's territory, the land north and east of Galilee. He married his niece Salome, the daughter of Herodias, Herod Antipas's wife of sin. Now, as I mentioned before, there was a fourth son of Herod the Great, Aristobulus IV. Aristobulus was a prince of Judea, but he never became king, although his son and grandson were the next two kings in the Herodian Dynasty. So the fifth king in the Herodian Dynasty, let me go over these again. The first king was Herod the Great. The second is Herod Archelaus. The third is Herod Antipas. Fourth is Herod Philip. And then the fifth king would have been Herod Agrippa. That was Aristobulus IV's son. Now Herod Agrippa I ruled from AD 37 to 44. He was grandson of Herod the Great and nephew of Herodias, Herod Antipas's wife. He eventually ended up ruling over even a bigger territory than his grandfather did, than his grandfather Herod the Great did. In the book, he's known as the one who put Peter in prison, although he couldn't keep him there. He couldn't keep him there. That's Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 5 and 6 through 19. Although he did not give glory when he was referred to as a god by the people of Tyre, and he was thus struck by an angel and eaten by worms. Acts 12, 20 through 23. And the last king, the sixth king, is Herod Agrippa II, who ruled from the 50s AD until a time long after the Jewish War, and he died around 93 AD. Like his father Agrippa I and his great-grandfather Herod the Great, he ruled over a large territory. He's the one who interviewed Paul along with the Roman procurator Porcius Festus when Paul was imprisoned in Caesarea after Paul's third missionary journey. This is Acts 25 to 26. Agrippa exclaimed to Paul, this is a more literal translation, "In a short time you'll persuade me to become a Christian," in Acts 26:28. Now we don't know if this was an ironic statement, or if this was a true statement or what, but that's the way it really truly reads. Either way, Paul ended up appealing directly to Caesar, and so had no more contact with this final powerful Herod. After this last Herod, we don't hear anything more of the Herods, of the dynasty of the Herods. So this is all we know of the dynasty of the Herods, 6 of them. So now let's take a look at the timeline chart here, and just take a look at it, put this in a timeline. At the very top, we have Antipater the Idumean, the one who I noted as the father of the Herodian dynasty. He died in 43 BC. He was a chief minister of Judea, and he made his sons Phasaelus and Herod governors of Jerusalem and Galilee. Founder of the Herodian dynasty, Antipater the Idumean. Now Idumea was a territory south of Judah, about 2/3 of the way down the Dead Sea. And in Greek, the word means pertaining to Edom. Pertaining to Edom. So his son, Herod the Great, was the first king in the Herodian dynasty. He ruled from 37 to 4 BC. Built the port of Caesarea, built Masada, built the temple, renovated the temple, and he did a lot of wicked things too. And underneath Herod the Great, we have his 4 sons. Herod Archelaus, from 4 BC to 6 AD, who received half of his father's territory. Herod Philip, from 4 BC to 34 AD, received 1/4 of his father's territory, the land north and east of Galilee. Herod Antipas, who ruled from 4 BC to 39 AD, who received 1/4 of his father's territory also. And then we have Aristobulus, Herod the Great's fourth son, who was not a king. And we have his sons. Herod Agrippa was the 5th king of the dynasty. Herod Agrippa I being the 5th king of the dynasty. And Herod Agrippa II being the 6th king of the Herodian dynasty. So that's all we have from the Bible about the Herodian dynasty. I hope this has been an enjoyable Bible study. I hope maybe you've picked up a few bits of information that you weren't aware of before. I want to give thanks to everyone for your attendance. I want to say Baruch Hashem, praise the Lord, and Shalom.